All right, so I've spent the last week cramming multiple 40-hour videos into several day chunks, and I've needed to spend some time just sort of looking out the window at nothing. And so I've done that, and I came up with another video idea. Today, I'm joined by Cameron and Griffin, and we're going to talk about our headphone and audio equipment reviewer gear that we use and the reasons why we use it. So our chain, our process, and the reference points that we have. So, without further ado, let's get going into the video. All right, guys, so what is your reviewer equipment that you use? What do you use as a reference point, and why? Let's start with Cameron, the DAC man.
The DAC man. I guess it kind of depends on what I'm reviewing. In terms of headphone stuff, my main setup itself is the Ferrum Wandler GoldenSound edition as the DAC, going through the Zale EQ1, which I find really helpful for EQing headphones, because just being able to do stuff on the fly and hear adjustments as you're making them is pretty useful compared to digital stuff where it's on and off. And then I use the Zale HM1 as the amplifier, not only because it's both objectively and subjectively great, but also because it's powerful enough to run just about anything. And when I am reviewing DACs, it allows me to connect two of them and directly A/B between the two. So I can actually have two different sources, swap back and forth between them whilst playing them at the same time, volume match them on the amp itself. And so it makes the process of actually reviewing DACs quite a bit easier. When I am looking at DACs as well, I don't just use headphones, I also use speakers. So I've got a speaker set up in the other room, nicely treated room and everything, which is great for personal enjoyment, but also sometimes I find helps make certain things a little more obvious than sometimes listening on headphones can. I'm not at all one of the people that thinks that you need to use speakers to judge source gear. I think that that's cope, quite frankly. But it's helpful to listen in both sorts of environments, because certain products are probably going to be bought more by people who are using speakers anyway. I don't have a tube amp at the moment. I would love to get one, and it's been really helpful when I've had one here, because never mind the colorations of a tube amp, but just the output impedance factor itself, that can change a lot of headphones. And there are a lot of headphones which in many cases will sound arguably quite a bit better if you put them on a high output impedance source. They get a little bit of a bass bump in some cases. And so I would like to get one of those. I don't have one at the moment. And then I guess in terms of headphones, well, for the most part, I'm just listening to whatever it is that I'm reviewing. But in terms of comparisons, I've got a bit of a collection. My benchmark and my kind of personal favorite in terms of overall neutrality, for the most part, has for the long time been the Hyperman's Svara. I do still EQ it a bit. I don't think there's a headphone which is not able to be improved to some degree without EQ, or with EQ, sorry. I've got things like the ZMF Atrium, the Headphone 2 GT, and the Abyss 1266 for when I'm looking for, okay, this headphone's a bit weird. Is it doing the fun, not neutral things as well as some of these other highly liked options? So I keep those around for comparisons as well.
For the evaluative stuff, the process for you, what equipment do you use for that?
I always like to do my subjective evaluation before measuring, because I don't want what I see on the measurements to influence my thoughts on the gear first. So I'll always get that out of the way before I go on and measure stuff. For that, I use the Audio Precision APX 555, and for headphone amps, a dummy load from Neurochrome. Tom makes great stuff. He makes some amps and stuff as well, actually.
Shoutouts to Tom Christensen.
Yeah, but yeah, in terms of reviewing headphones, my main amp is the Zale HM1, because it's as close to transparent as I've heard. It's powerful, objectively great, subjectively great, and you can do a little bit of a coloration on it. So if I wanted to find, maybe this headphone might work better with a slightly warmer sounding amp, I can just turn the feedback off and it gets a bit warmer. So just having all of those controls at my fingertips, having something which I can kind of trust to be transparent, and something which when I'm reviewing DACs allows me to swap between two different ones at the same time. It's just, as a reviewer's piece of kit, it's fantastic.
Would you say that are you a Spotify guy, a Tidal guy, Qobuz?
No. Okay, so I use Rune. And there's a few reasons for that. One is just in terms of my own listening, I love Rune Radio, just getting the music suggestions and stuff from that. But as a reviewer, the best bit about Rune is the multi-endpoint streaming stuff. So I can play to however many DACs I've got connected to my PC, including grouping them together so they're all playing the exact same thing at the exact same time. I can stream stuff to my speaker setup. I can stream stuff to many DAPs. So just in terms of convenience, Rune is fantastic, and I wouldn't want to be without it just as a listener, but as a reviewer, it would be an absolute nightmare to set up a lot of stuff without the network streaming capabilities that Rune has. Yeah, so that's my setup. Andrew, What about yours? How are you testing stuff out when you've got things in?
Yeah, so I mainly just test things with test tones. I don't listen to music anymore these days. No, I'm just kidding. My test equipment has sort of changed over the years a little bit, but as far as like the measurement equipment, that has been the same for a while. We obviously use the B&K 528 head, but we also use the Gross systems as well. The Gross 43AG with the KB 5000 pinna. That's nerdy stuff that nobody cares about. But as far as the audio equipment that I use, for my amplifier and my DAC, I use the Matrix X-Saber Pro for the DAC and the Bioelectric HPA V550 for the amplifier. And the reasoning behind this is mainly because I haven't been able to downsize sufficiently yet. But there is actually a functional reason why I went with those, particularly the amplifier. I needed something that was able to drive a wide range of products, right? So something that has enough power to drive something like an HE6, but also is going to be okay with more sensitive IEMs. And for the most part, it's been good for that. I think there are still some IEMs that it's not going to be the best for, but I found it to be pretty good for most products. I can't think of anything in recent memory where I've had to deliberately switch to a different amplifier for noise floor issues or anything like that. It's also low output impedance, which is nice. And then I can also run speakers out the back. So when I'm doing things like ANC testing and I need to run a sweep through a speaker, it's helpful for that. I also use a tube amplifier to test exactly what Cameron mentioned, higher output impedance combinations. So I use the GoldenSound Kenzie, and that has both a high output impedance and low output impedance option. They're both higher than what you would get with like a low output impedance solid state source, but I find it useful for testing how headphones pair with tube amplifiers for one, but importantly, higher output impedance devices. You could do this other ways, of course. You could just get an impedance adapter, and I recommend that for people who want to try that. But this is a nice way to sort of test what it's like on various different types of equipment. And as an example, the headphone that I just recently reviewed, like this has an impedance bump, the D1 here, and it does change when being run off of a tube amplifier, right? You can actually see the measured bass performance increase. As far as the headphones that I use, so for the longest time, it was the HD600 as sort of like a neutral timbre reference point. There are other headphones that I've used in the past as well for this, but I just always found myself going back to that one. I think that's recently been replaced now by the Head Audio D1 because it has similar characteristics for timbre as the HD600, but also it does better in a number of ways, like bass extension, and it doesn't have sort of the 3 blob effect. For gaming headsets, I tend to compare things with the Odyssey Maxwell, though the recent HyperX Cloud 3 Wireless is making a strong case for itself, and I'm hopeful to review more gaming headsets soon. That's on my radar, and I'm trying to get more of those in. And for noise canceling headphones, it would have been something like, the Focal Batiste. Now it's definitely the Sennheiser HDB 630 as that reference point. Now, as far as the actual music listening that I do, I have a list of test tracks that I go through, but I do all of this through Tidal, and that's basically it. For dongle stuff, or if I'm going to trade shows, I did use the Fosse Audio DS2, and I also used the Q-Deluxe 5K for EQ purposes. And I still am going to continue to use the Q-Deluxe 5K, but I recently got sent this. This is the Krongle, and I might start using this because it has the ability to use EQ profiles as well. It's a bit more clunky than the Q-Deluxe 5K, so in a way it's kind of like the Q-Deluxe 5K with extra steps, but I believe that this is actually more powerful, so this might be a better device to take to trade shows. But that's basically it. Griffin, what is your process, and what are your comparison points?
I'm going to start with the comparison point because I feel like it's a little bit different than either of your responses. Well, frankly, I think my entire process is quite different than both of you. So starting with the reference point, it's my HD800 with an EQ preset that I've had for a long time, kind of just spent time refining. It sounds excellent to me, as close to neutral as I've ever heard from a headphone, and it kind of serves as the benchmark against which all things fall woefully short. When a headphone is really good, it usually sounds similar to this EQ'd HD800 in some way or another. Like the D1 we just reviewed, it in the mid-range specifically really reminds me of this EQ preset on that headphone, which yeah, it sounds great. And when it comes to IEMs, the Truthier Pure is my reference. Probably not a surprise to anyone, but yeah, that's the IEM that gets closest to what I'm looking for. So touching on my kind of DAC amp source setup, I use this, I think it's around $3,000, this DAC amp combo called the MacBook Pro M3 Max, or whatever version of a MacBook Pro they sent me.
How's the plankton on that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm not a huge DAC amp guy. Mostly because most of them don't really make that much of a difference to the overall evaluation, in my opinion. So I tend not to put too much stock in that stuff. So for that reason, that doesn't really factor into my evaluation of headphones, which is primarily what I review. However, there is one part of my process that DAC amps play a pretty big part in, which is having a bunch of dongles around and having them all plugged into my computer at one time, and using this software called Audio Hijack by Rogue Amoeba, which allows you to split the output of my computer to all of the dongles simultaneously and set their level independently. So what I'll do is I'll set the output of all of those individually, and I will measure them all on my rig here. I will note the volume at which they all look level matched, and then I will set those to those volumes, and that allows me to basically have a level matched comparison across whatever I'm listening to. That's kind of like the later part of my review process. Like the comparisons is where I think the review really gets interesting. So yeah, I'm not a DAC amp person, and my reference isn't really a headphone that exists in stock formation. But I think the process I have really works because it anchors me to something that is really neutral for me, like as uncolored as I can possibly get. And then when it comes to the comparison section and kind of duking it out between all of these different headphone models, it is really about getting as close of a level match and an even ground for all of them as I can, so that when I'm listening to them, whatever I hear is the truth of how these headphones compare for me. And I think it's pretty obvious this process is kind of different to the other two reviewers in this call right now. And I think this kind of leads into a discussion about what we value. Because, like, for example, Cameron said he wants to avoid measuring before he listens because he thinks it'll impact his subjective assessment of the headphone sound by seeing a measurement. And I think that's totally fair. For me, it's a little bit different. Like, I don't trust my rig enough, especially with certain devices like IEMs and closeback headphones, to say that the result actually makes me feel any way about how the headphone's likely to sound, because it's probably meaningfully inaccurate. But also because measuring, before doing something like comparisons allows me to eliminate bias due to level. That I feel is a trade-off worth making. But I don't know. How do you guys approach this stuff?
I'm glad you raised the bit about the level matching, but also to do with measurement fixtures in general. I think one of the things that people have a tendency to do is over-focus on the measured result and undervalue the subjective component to it, right? Because you see the line on the graph and you think, well, this is just how this thing performs. But as you start to learn about how headphones behavior shifts around, especially above 3 kilohertz from person to person and also from measurement rig to measurement rig, you start to be able to kind of like mentally apply a certain amount of like subconscious smoothing to that region whenever you see a measurement. So as you've sort of developed, I guess, this muscle, I don't think that measuring something before listening really has that strong of a bias or biasing effect on someone's judgment of it. I think it would if you were hyper focused and fixated on, the measured result. But I don't think that any of us are particularly prone to doing that. And also a lot of the folks who are doing measurements, they also know this.
Well, I should probably clarify. When I said that, I was mostly referring to source gear stuff. With headphones, I'm quite happy to look at the measurements before listening to it because the differences are so drastic. It's just with source gear stuff where the differences are often so minor that it absolutely could be influenced by expectation bias and all sorts of other problems. That's when I do want to just listen to it. And I've also got an ABX device as well, which I use, and I probably should have mentioned that, before I measure anything. The differences are small enough, and even though I'm the one that reviews a lot of DACs and amps, I don't think they make anywhere near as much of a difference as headphones. A lot of people think that I do. That is not the case. It's specifically because the differences are so minor that I don't want to measure until I've spent proper time listening.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, I appreciate that clarification, yeah.
So with all of this said, though, like I do think that there are good reasons to listen before measuring. I think that is a common critique that people have of people who are reviewing products with measurements involved. They think, the measurement is biasing the judgment here. And maybe that's happening, but I do think there's value in listening first because in many ways that also gives you an indication of is this behaving correctly, or is there some sort of meaningful difference in how I'm measuring it versus how I'm hearing it? Because you have to remember, when you're measuring headphones, it's like you're trying to put a headphone on another person, which is never going to be like as easy as just placing it on yourself and getting it in the right spot right away. So there's a lot of that's involved to make sure that, you know, you're actually getting the positioning to be somewhat reasonable, or as reasonable as you can, and then taking as many seatings as you can too. One other thing you mentioned, Griffin, which I want to discuss, the level matching thing is super interesting. This is also something that I think is relevant for EQ. As part of my process, I found it helpful, at least, to do EQ and then toggle the EQ on and off when listening to music to see, you know, how subjectively a headphone is going to sound in its default configuration without any EQ relative to what it's been EQ'd to be kind of like the ideal, right? It gets tricky when doing this because you can't do this without level matching. You are more prone to liking the thing that is louder. So if you have an EQ where you've needed to make meaningful adjustments where it changes the overall volume level of the device, you are primed to like the thing that is louder more. Or another factor might be that you are primed to like the thing that you have EQ'd more because you've EQ'd it. So you have to be very careful when doing this kind of comparison with EQ, and I think it's something that also has a tendency to kind of like bias people. So level matching and just, you know, EQing in general. But I do think it's a useful tool.
Yeah, for sure. And I do want to clarify that, like, I think all of us listen before we measure just because that's the easier way to do things. Like, I get a headphone, I'm excited to listen to it, so I listen to it. But also, like, it's not going to bias the perception of a bunch of headphones I've already heard before, right? Like, the only one that I haven't measured yet is the new headphone that I'm reviewing. The things I'm usually comparing it to are headphones I've heard already, so there's no real biasing danger.
When I'm level matching sources, I do try and do that as precisely as I possibly can. If I'm doing DACs, then I'll literally hook both of them up to the HM1, hook the output of that up to the analyzer, and level match the two outputs as precisely as I possibly can. I gotta be honest, with headphones though, I don't usually focus too much on level matching in and of itself, just because it's kind of hard to say what the right way to do it is. Like, you can level match at 1 kilohertz, but then if one of them's got 4 dB more at 6 kilohertz or something, you're going to need to turn that one down more when you're actually listening to it normally. It's a case of, if the two frequency responses are different, where are you level matching? And so that bit, honestly, I do just kind of do by ear. And I just treat it as, well, what is the level that I would usually listen to this headphone at? Because that's kind of part of the experience. If there's something which prevents me from turning it up louder, that's a flaw in and of itself, I guess. But yeah, I'm not really sure what the right answer there is, to be honest.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, it's not really clear. Like, when I do this, I'm basically just eyeballing it so the measured curves at the volumes I set look reasonably well normalized. And obviously I'm going into this aware that, you know, certain frequencies are louder than others, and certain ones are more likely to dictate the perception of volume than others. But yeah, you're right. There's no concise, clear rules about what is a level matched signal when we're dealing with a full frequency bandwidth of 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. So yeah, no, I totally get why you wouldn't overfixate on that. It's just something I like to do. It's something that gives me a little bit of peace of mind and makes me feel like I'm being a little bit more, if not objective, then kind of precise in the actual difference between these devices. But yeah.
One thing that this sort of reminded me of is, I think we all try to use a variety of different music, or program material as the research would call it. But we do also have, you know, certain preferences for certain types of music too. Like, I remember recently, Griffin, you sort of called me out for, you know, like, oh, the music that you like is way too well recorded. And it's true. Like, a lot of the stuff that I listen to happens to be stuff that is going to do better with certain styles of tunings because it is recorded a certain way. Whereas, you know, if I think about products like the Edition XV, for example, it's a much warmer sounding headphone, but that's also going to mean that it's going to do better for a wider range of stuff because it's not going to hit as many people in those pain points in the treble as something like an HE600. So if you're listening to a lot of stuff that's going to cause these problems, you know, that's going to, I think, impact positively or negatively your sense of how a product actually performs.
Yeah, no, I 100% think that because you straight up don't listen to like pop music, you're just often getting this much less compressed, much less sibilant, much less like driven by bass and pumping compression kind of sound that, yeah, I think a lot of the headphones you like that I don't, like the Austrian Audio Composer or the Hi-Fi Man headphones that aren't the Edition XV, I think those have nice qualities on the kind of well-recorded, softer, instrumental focused music that you like. Whereas for me, with like pop music, like Dua Lipa or Ariana Grande, like there's just so much sibilance and so much potential for things to get harsh because they're mixed so loud, and there's so much, hard compression on drums and stuff like that, yeah, I typically need something that handles that stuff as well as, or balances with at least, the jazz music or the R&B or the, more instrumentally focused music.
And like, I'll be the first person to say that the headphone that I listen to for jazz and acoustic is not the same headphone that I enjoy metal on or rock or whatever else, right? Like, I know that there's these bits about like the genre doesn't dictate the kind of listener preference that people like on average, but for me it does. Like, the style of recording absolutely influences what kind of headphone sound I want with that music.
That's why I have multiple headphones, because there are certain genres where, like, okay, I like electronic music quite a lot, and for a lot of that I do tend to gravitate to weirder stuff like the 1266. But then if you listen to anything with a voice in it, I want to get it off my head. Actually, I'll put my test tracks playlist in the description so people can have a look at that. Those are the ones that I kind of just go to straight away when I'm listening to stuff. I think a bit like Andrew, or maybe slightly different to Andrew, but I do find that there's a lot of tracks which I like because of how they are recorded and produced. Even if I don't necessarily like the music itself, I find myself going back to them either just for enjoyment or test tracks for evaluating gear because of how the track itself sounds and the things that it does. But then I'll also listen to, there's a bunch of tracks on the wall behind me here which are brick wall to hell and back, but I still listen to a lot.
This is why people are going to hate me for saying this, but you got to listen to the gear, not the music.
I mean, look, that kind of is our job. Like, as much as it does have potential to rob joy from the experience, I personally enjoy listening to gear with music I already know I enjoy. And when I find gear that I enjoy, man, it makes music a lot more enjoyable. So
that's the whole point, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. It's why we're here. It's to find gear that makes our music sound better. And
no, see, for me, it's to rob people of the joy that they experience when they listen to stuff. People say comparison is the thief of joy. No. I am the thief of joy.
Because yeah, for me, people say, "Oh, stop worrying about gear and just enjoy the music." Well, that's why I'm here. That's why most of people are here, because we like music, and we want the music to sound as good as it can. But to do that, you need to find the gear that does that best. So you have to listen to the gear for a little bit, at least at first, or in our case, it's literally our job to do so. That's the point. And it's also just a little bit, gives you a grin when you find stuff which is really impressive and makes music sound great. It's not because the song itself was great. You've heard that song 20 times before. But when you hear that song and it sounds so much better than you've heard it before, because you're listening to some really great gear, that's when I get the goosebumps.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the point. And on that, I think we can end the video. As always, these videos are made possible by headphones.com. If you want to have great experiences with your music too, check out headphones.com the next time you're in the market for a new piece of audio gear or a new headphone. They will go to all kinds of crazy extents to help you have these kinds of great experiences too. If you guys want to chat with us, you can do so at forum.headphones.com or in the Discord link in the description. And until next time, we'll see you guys later. Bye for now.
Bye, guys.